What is up, everybody? RLTK podcast. Jordan here with my boy Chris. Chris, what is good?
What's up, big bro?
Not the Cowboys.
Yeah, I was afraid that was going to come up.
Disappointing. Terribly disappointing.
Very.
And yeah, it's been pretty tragic. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what else to say about that. I'll just probably leave it at that. I mean, I still think we'll make it out the NFC, but yeah. Anyway,
here's my thing, man.
How you gonna lose to the Cardinals, bro? Crazy.
Look, what I say is this: is that the Cowboys is one of the most inconsistent team I have ever seen. It doesn't make
Dak
any
Prescott.
sense to me.
Somebody please trade for Dak Prescott.
I wouldn't let go of Dak just yet.
I absolutely would. I absolutely would. Just gotta be honest.
Not yet. I think he has to. I think this is the season for him to prove himself, and I think that he can do that. One thing, though, I would say is that our O-line is really not that good. It's not.
Well, we got a bunch of injuries too. There's a bunch of injuries. There's like three O linemen that are injured. I think they were injured last game, which kind of explains it to some degree. But
and we lost one of our important
Dak
players.
Prescott not to be trash against the Cardinals. But anyway,
I remember. You told me Sunday, you was like, well, now Dak has to be a quarterback now, and that hurt me to my core.
Facts. Big facts.
Hurting me to my core, man. Yeah, it messed me up.
But anyways, well, let's move on. For the listeners, our bad, we didn't put out a podcast. It's been about a month. I got really sick. My wife got really sick. We usually podcast in advance, but we just got caught at a bad time, and then everybody got ill. So we're back, jumping back into it every other week. We'll keep this show on the road. We'll keep it moving. But yeah, we're excited to be podcasting again. So Chris, tell us what our topic is today.
Well, I want to talk about identity today.
Okay, let's do
it. Which really is interesting to me, it's the fact that we can, as creatures, humans, can identify as something.
There's a lot of identifying going on today. That's for sure.
Facts, big facts, and one of the questions. Well, one thing I do question, I guess, for myself is that: are we free to identify for ourselves? I think we can dive into that conversation and really talk about identity, especially coming from a Christian perspective, coming from the idea that we are made in the image of God. This is a very big topic.
Absolutely. I was gonna say, you over here trying to dive in the deep end, bro. I'm like, yo, can we take a couple practice laps first before we you know what I'm saying? Do we have the right to identify? I'm like, well, chill, bro. Slow down, relax. We could whoa.
Yeah, and I guess full warning, man. It's conversations like this, it gets offensive, and so we encourage our listeners, when you listen to what we say, and just know that we're trying to understand what these things mean. We're trying to identify what identity really is and what it really means, and because we all want to belong somewhere, and we all want to understand ourselves, especially as
well, I think something important to set this conversation up would be to kind of speak to where we are ideologically when it comes to identity. And so and I know we've talked about this before, but I'll just mention it again for the sake of this particular podcast. I think we talked about it on Worldview. We've talked about it a few times because it's really interwoven into everything, the fabric of everything that's happening right now. In society, and you can see this in more Eastern cultures, they're more cyclical. Before we were where we are now, we got our identity from the sense of community that we had. So it was you were a part of something bigger than yourself, whether that be your family, your neighborhood, your school, and to some degree we still experience and believe in some of these things, just not so much as we did previously. And so people were really big into America and what it was and what it stands for, and like the society at large, and you got your identity from the role that you played being a part of that society, coming together to make that society what it was. Or like, you know, your family name and what that means, and like how you live up to those values and those standards. And so like how we understand identity today has become much more individualized, right? It's about self. It's about who I want to define myself as. And then more importantly, we've gone even further and said like how we identify and define ourselves is based upon how we feel, right? And so once again, this isn't me saying what's good or bad. This is me just observing what seems to be actually true about where we find ourselves right now in society. We tend to identify ourselves based off of how we feel. We answer questions based off of how we feel. We give answers. I feel, right? And so, so that's where we find ourselves. And then as a consequence, people are like way more living in their internal worlds, way more focused on how they feel. And then that's obviously compounded and influenced by social media. And then as a consequence, like there are all these new things happening that like I've just never experienced before, you know, like there are things being parsed out and separated that we just never thought to separate, you know, 50 years ago. I mean, honestly, 20 years ago. And so as a consequence, we find ourselves in a very interesting moment in society where identity is like hard to define, ethereal, abstract, and like fluid, right? I think that's fluid is a term that people would use. And so, yeah, I think we've moved from the more communal approach to a very individualized approach. And I think we're seeing some of the ramifications of that in our culture today. And I think that's what we have to be like when we think about stuff like this. I think the work that we have to do is to ask ourselves, like, does this thing actually work or not? Right? Like, let's just be objective about it. Does it actually work? And what I mean by that is like, does it work at large? Like there'll always be exceptions to rules, right? But like generally speaking, is this actually working or not? Is this social experiment doing what we thought it would do, or is it not doing what we thought it would do? And I mean, I would surmise that it's not working. But anyways, we can get into more of that in a minute. Anything you want to add, bro?
I think you pointed out something that's very interesting, is that back in the day it was more communal. And so my question is that intrinsically true? Is that like is that a value that is actually supposed to be, you know, like, because even in like today, you know, even when it comes to these the different identities that people create for themselves, they still find themselves in community. You know, they're still in a community, and they still, and people in the community acknowledges them. So they still look for the answer, or they look for the acknowledgement, or to be reaffirmed by the community. And so there is an interesting there's an interesting point here to make, that even though we're putting in the effort to create identity as individuals, for some reason we still look to community to acknowledge what we think we have created. And so I think the question that we can even start on is that, you know, is truly, not in the sense of culture today, but is identity found in self or community? I guess we can just start there. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could argue which one's first.
Yeah. You
and
can.
Like, and I think it's hard to determine the order because I think both are necessary, right? And I think, but I think when we have one without the other, like we have problems. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. Like we've swung way too far in the individualized direction. And I mean, like we see it in like people having like these identities that are new, like gender identities or sexual identities, or, you know, claiming to be, you know, animals and all those different types of things. But like there is this need for the people around you to affirm that that is true. Right? It's not like people are just saying, hey, I'm this, and then they're just cool with just being that, and it is what it is. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
need for other people to affirm that thing about you and say that it's true, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that in itself points to um, this communal recognition being essential for humans. Now, the
Mm.
interesting thing about that is the worldview that we live by currently kind of messes that up, because what it says is uh, you're yourself and you get your identity from yourself and you get to be whatever you want. The
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is we go to people around us, tell them what we are, and if they don't agree, we have a problem with it.
Mm. Yeah.
That like there's some that doesn't work.
Right.
If it's all about individualism, then why on earth do they have to recognize my identity?
Yeah.
It's mine.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like that doesn't it doesn't quite work. It gets
Mm.
stuck there, right? And
Yeah.
so like there's this thing in humans I think that like needs that affirmation. That's why I think people genuinely do feel, and like I may be different from other people in this, obviously as like a mental health professional or whatever, or like living in
Mm-hmm.
that world, in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Like because of like, so there's this book called The Reciprocating Self, and I forgot
Mm.
who wrote it, but it's a great book. And in that book, it's a human development book, and they're talking about this idea of us needing our identity reflected back to us in order to
Yeah.
like cement it. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing, like this, like starting with self. I think I'm this thing. Now I'm gonna go
Mm.
tell everybody that I'm this thing, and now I need that thing reflected back to me in order to believe it's true. And I think the reason we need that is because we're like image bearers, and that's the way God designed us, or at least
Yeah.
that's how I make sense of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, as a consequence, when that doesn't happen, it like is incredibly disorienting. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's like, for
Mm.
example, if if a child is like being raised by their family, right? We want them to be nurtured, loved, told they're unique, they're worthy, they're valued, like all these different types of things, which by the
Mm-hmm.
way are completely borrowed from the Christian worldview, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like that stuff like is needed and necessary to raise a healthy human, right?
Mm.
And then if we
Yeah.
didn't give that kid those things, imagine if we had a child, we locked it in a room, just fed it bread and water, never let it come out, never let it wash itself, and all we
Yeah.
did is shout cuss words through the door.
Yeah.
By the time that kid's a teenager, look, what are they going to be? If they even made it that far, they probably wouldn't. They probably die before then, right?
Yeah.
But like, what would they be? What kind of person would they be, right? So like the things that we like have imparted in us by other people are essential. Like none of us have learned anything by ourselves,
Yeah.
right? We're an accumulation of the things that our parents taught us and then the things that we've learned after that from teachers, professors, books, videos. So we're learning all this stuff from other people.
Yeah.
And so this idea that like I'm this individualized individual who makes these autonomous decisions by myself isn't even true to begin with, because you're an amalgamation of all the
Yeah.
people that have influenced you and
Good.
encouraged you and challenged you and
Right.
hurt you, right?
Mm.
You're like, you are like a coming together of all those things. And so
Yeah.
like to me, when I think about it, like it just doesn't work like if you start with the individualist piece, because like
Mm.
you don't even start that way as a child. When a child is
That's
birthed,
good.
a
That's
child
very good.
doesn't start being, it's not
Mm.
like the baby just like, it's not like the baby climbs out the womb like, yo, what's good, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, mom,
Yeah.
give me a smoke, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I
Right.
gotta head to work, I gotta go find a job. Like, no, the baby gets, baby gets like
Bills to pay.
delivered, cared
Yeah.
for, nurtured, can't take care of itself, and like
Mm.
is taught how to function in the world, and then goes out into the world, right?
Very good point. That's so
And so
good.
yeah, like I
Good.
don't, it just like
Love
doesn't
that.
make sense to me. And
I
yo, if
love
I
that.
got friends out there who like are on that individualist stuff to the core, like I want to hear from you. Like let me know
Yes.
how you
Same.
make sense of this. Because
Yeah.
I haven't made sense. Like in that way. I just don't see how it works. But
Yeah.
if somebody knows how it works, like I'm all ears. Like I
Always.
want to learn. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yes. And I love how you said that because the next I love it because the next question is what is the relationship between value and identity, right?
Oof.
And so I want to add to your point in the sense of how can you actually create identity by yourself without community. I love how you just laid that out, because
Yeah, we
identity
don't.
has identity has to be tied to what you perceive as what's valuable, right?
Mhm.
And value within itself has to be tied to something that is true, right? And so, like, what you perceive to be true, right? And so here comes the conversation in the sense of, this is my truth, right? So truth in itself has to, well, identity in itself has to be tied to truth as well, what you think is true, because you're saying this is your true self. So
Mhm.
when you say this is your true self, well, what do you mean by true then, right? And so for some reason,
Correct.
so we cannot have the conversation about identity if we don't talk about truth, right? We can't talk.
Get
We
them.
can't talk. We can't talk about identity if we don't talk about what is intrinsically valuable, right? And so, in a sense of trying to create, because I personally believe you can't create truth. I think truth, it already exists, and I think
Correct.
in the sense of, God said, let's create them in our image and our likeness, right? That in itself holds an intrinsic value that is from God Himself, that He has given to us to display, right? And
Mhm.
so that is it's not an individual thing, it's a communal thing. You know
Correct.
what I'm saying? Like, truth is a communal reality. It's not an individual reality. Right. And so it's like, if you're trying to create yourself, like you said, you're pulling from all these pieces to put together. It's like, in the sense of, you're coming with your own philosophical thought of who you think you are and calling it your truth, your identity. And I think that is, like, it doesn't work really well, because it's meant to be shared, right? In the sense of, like it's the reason why Christ said we all have the mind of Christ.
Mhm.
Not me, not just you. We all have it. So there is
Yep.
a truth in is there's a truth in the identity that Christ gives us that we all share, you
Mhm.
know? And yes, we are, in a sense, individuals. Yes, in a sense, we do have our own gifts and we do have our own talents. Yes, in a sense, we have our own minds and how we interpret things. But I think, even in those things that we possess as self, we are still we are still we are still influenced and encouraged to pursue this one truth together, so we
Yeah.
may look like Christ Himself. You understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So, like,
Yeah.
I agree with you, to the sense of, I think it starts with community first. I think
Yep.
that's where it starts, you know?
I mean, I'm thinking about this even as I'm sitting here talking with you, and I'm like, and I don't actually have the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm like, what
Yeah.
does it mean to be an individual? Like, I'm thinking about my own life and
Yeah.
the things that shape me, drive me,
Hmm.
encourage me. Like, I'm thinking about my kids,
Yeah.
thinking about my wife, I'm thinking about my friends. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
those are the things that like shape who I am. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Hmm.
I get up in the morning and do the things that I do for those children, bro. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. You
Like
do.
even
Yeah.
the sense of self that I have is deeply rooted and shaped by the people that are most important to me in my life.
Correct. It's true.
And I can't shake that.
Yes.
And I feel like if I did, then who would I be?
Yeah.
What would I be grounded in?
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like I would just be,
Be lost.
yes,
Yes, bro. I understand.
lost, bro.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a generation of people that are like not rooted in family,
Yeah.
not grounded in like
Yeah.
relationships with other people, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And like they're feeling like that lostness, that detachedness, that disconnection in ways that I probably can't even fathom. Do you know what I'm
Mm.
saying? And that to
Hmm.
me, just like there is nothing about that that sounds appealing to me whatsoever, bro.
Facts.
And then I
Yeah.
think about what you were saying earlier too about the Imago Day. I'm like, do we understand how important, like in Genesis, when it talks about being made in the image of God, like how
Mhm.
influential that has been on the world?
Right. Yeah.
Like, think
Mm-hmm.
about it. If God doesn't exist and we're not image bearers, then everything is fair game. I
Facts.
can do whatever I want to whoever I want, however I want, for whatever reason.
Yep.
And there's no reason not to. Who
Yeah.
cares about social norms? Who cares
Yeah.
about rules?
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
You should do it because it's right, says who?
Right.
You
Mm.
shouldn't impose your will on somebody else, says
Yeah.
who?
Right.
Says you?
Mm.
Nah.
Right. Yeah.
It makes me think about Black Panther. Nah, I'm your king. You know what I'm saying? Nah.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like
Mm-hmm.
I can
I
just
do.
impose my will on. Basically, I can impose my will on whoever I want to, and
Yeah.
like what then defines reality is violence. Essentially, who can be the
Yeah.
most violent? Who can do the most vile stuff? Who
Yeah.
can overpower the other? And like we
Yeah.
did use like that was civilization. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
a couple millennia ago. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And like
Mm-hmm.
let's keep it a stack. There's still parts of the world that operate that way today.
Absolutely.
And here's
Yeah.
the interesting thing about that. None of the things that we believe in the West right now could survive or function in any of those environments. All
Yes.
that goes out the window. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yes.
Civil rights out
Yeah.
the
Uh,
window. Like
yeah.
all of that stuff. Freedom of speech out the window. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not
I do.
happening.
I do.
All that
Yeah.
stuff is gone, bro. And now it's
Yeah.
about surviving. It's about taking care of your family. It's about
Yeah.
like being with a group of people who are going to take care of you and you're going to take care of them. And so it's just, yeah, it's fascinating, bro.
Yeah. It
Like
is.
I
Yeah.
think I think we once again, because of where we live, who we are, the fact that we're not at war, even though there's war happening on the other side of the world right now, we don't even think about it. We just get
Yeah.
upset because our gas prices are high. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
guilty. I'm guilty of that too. I'm not like trying to point the finger at anybody.
Yeah.
Just saying that's like true. Like
Mm.
because of where we live, we just don't think about that stuff. And oftentimes I keep like my boy Ray Robles when he came on the podcast, shout out to Ray, GCU professor, and he talked about the
Yes, sir.
idea of ethnocentrism and how
Yeah.
we always think about the world in terms of ourselves. Like that
Mm-hmm.
is it, bro. Like we don't think about our ideas globally. We
Yeah.
don't have a global perspective on our ideas. Like,
Yeah.
let's take this idea and let's transplant it to everywhere in the world and see if it will actually work. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things we think in the West that would fall flat on their face in other parts of the world. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
other parts of the world are outright rejecting those ideas because they're like, bro, you're not bringing that trash over here. You're not about to crumble the fabric of our society. If you guys want to go ahead and do that foolishness over there, go have at it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We'll
Mm-hmm.
stick with what we're doing over here.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating, it makes me think about the Ten Commandments when it talks about honor your mother and father and you'll live long in the promised land, right?
Mm-hmm.
The land that the Lord your God has promised you. I remember I was studying that maybe like a year ago or so. And
Yeah.
what I discovered is like God saying that because in a very practical sense, when families are weak, a
Mm-hmm.
civilization is primed for invasion.
Mm. Yeah.
Strong families means that civilization is actually able to protect itself. And that makes sense in the context of Israel being put in the promised land, which is this place that everybody wants to take over because
Mm-hmm.
it's where the port is and it's like the best place to import and export goods. God wants to put his people in the middle of the known civilization at that time to display what his kingdom looks like, his rule and reign. And this is what it would look like to serve the God of the Bible as opposed to all these other gods that you guys are serving, the lore of Hammurabi, all the different type of stuff, all the vile stuff that was happening in the world at that time, right? And so like it makes sense. And so it's like, but we see it in our society today. Like, I mean, if World War III hit our doorstep tomorrow, would anybody say that we're prime and ready?
Mm-hmm.
Our young people are prime and ready to go to war? Are 18 to 30-year-olds? The answer is
Yeah.
no. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying I want that. I'm not saying like I'm an advocate for that or any of those types of things.
Yeah.
Once again, we're having a conversation about what actually is, what's actually true about our world, the possibilities that actually exist. Like, I think when we like look at the things that we believe through some of those lenses that we've forgotten about in our comfortableness as Westerners, I think our views of those things can become a little bit more sobering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to someone the other day,
or a little more sober. Yeah.
and I'm starting to think that I think America is slowly losing its idea of tradition.
Oh yeah, it's
And
gone, bro.
yeah, there's some people trying to fight for it, and there's some people that are trying to live it out. But when I mean by tradition, I mean intrinsic value. What is actually valuable in life? I think because what we're talking about is the conversation of reality versus perceived reality, and how we perceive reality just it right now is just ruling. It is outranking what is actually true. You know, I think we don't really understand our existence. I think we really don't understand, what it means to bear this. So when we say we bear the image of God, we bear the image. We're made in His likeness. We're made in His image. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? The first thought that comes to my mind is His morals. I think God's morals is what we bear. And I think we're slowly trying to detach ourselves from that, right? When God gave the 10 Commandments to Israel, and later on, Christ said that love is the fulfillment of the commandments. It's like that is the character of God, right? Because love in itself is a moral principle,
Mm.
right? And it's not just an action. It's not just a feeling. It's an action. It's
Mm-hmm.
an action.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and if it's an action, that means it's ethics is applied. That makes
Mm.
love moral, right? And love is, in my opinion, love is the highest moral principle because that is what we
Mm.
all need, right?
Mm-hmm.
But love also requires growth, and love is also in the same room with order, right? And so I'm saying all this because there was once upon a time in America where we did lean on Christian values. There was once upon a time where we leaned into how men and women operated, regardless of all the bad apples that we have observed in history. Right. There was a point in time where, we leaned into these values that preserved us to this very moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? That got us here. And now we're at this place where we want to reject everything. And we come to this conclusion of of uh of individual self-preservation, right? And that in itself it doesn't work, not for the community and definitely not for the individual,
That's
because
the truth.
I've sat down and actually detached myself from everything that I thought I loved, wanted, associated myself with, things I wanted in life. And I found myself sinking in despair, fear, worry. I was genuinely scared because I couldn't find this dude, Chris, who was actually right here, but felt very far from me.
Mm.
It felt like he was in a foreign land because I couldn't grasp the idea of Chris, which is very interesting. I couldn't grasp the idea of Chris, meaning that identity is somewhat it's a metaphysical idea. It's not something that you can physically touch,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is something that is in your mind. So if it's in your mind, right, how do you best shape the mental self that you can flourish in? And I don't
Yeah,
think that's something you can do on your own, right? That
absolutely.
is not something you can do by yourself.
It
Because again, it
seems
goes
to
back
me.
to the
Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it just seems to me that we have to understand, like what you said earlier. I don't think we understand like what it means that we are made in the image of God. I don't
Mm.
think we actually understand that. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we get it. We read the sentence makes sense, but we don't understand the meaning of the sentence because it's so embedded in our existence, this idea of bearing an image that gives us meaning in life, that gives us direction, that gives us order, that gives us a moral and ethical guidance on how to love somebody, how to be in the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
This image that we bear gives us roles in life. Like what you were saying earlier about your children, you wake up, and I see it, bro. You wake up and you get to work because you see you have a family to provide. You understand what I'm saying? Like that is an image. That what you do there is is also what God does. He
Mm-hmm.
provides. You know, I mean, he doesn't sleep, but
Facts.
he provides. You know, he watches out, he protects, he gives wisdom, right? He draws you to himself to spend time, intimate time, to get to know him. You know, it's like all that he put in
Mm-hmm.
us to do as well. And that is something that we are slowly losing. You know, this need to be um creators of our own identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult. It's like, remember that there's a interesting joke, right? When the science, I think it was a scientist that told God that he can create his own human, and then God said, "Do it." And then the scientists went to grab dirt and said, "No, create your own dirt." You know what I'm saying?
Facts.
It's like, what can we actually create, bro? What can we actually produce outside of God's creation? What can we actually do? You
Nothing.
know, it's like, we can do nothing but fall in line, to be honest. You know, we can do
I mean,
nothing but
yeah,
fall
keeping
in
it a
line,
stack.
you know? And so
But the
when it,
reality with that is that like so for your example, like when you're talking about me waking up in the morning and getting to work,
yeah,
like there's deep joy for me there.
mm, yep,
You know what I'm saying?
mm-hmm,
There's like, and then coming home to my kids, loving on them,
yep,
talking to them, whatever.
yep,
Oh, you been
yep,
at work today, Dad? You've been, providing for the family, whatever. Like
mm,
they know what I do. They know what they know that like Dad goes to work so that we
yep,
can have the things that we have and enjoy the things that we enjoy in life.
yep,
And so, like, it's an honor for me to do that. It's a privilege. It's
yes,
a joy for me to do that. It's not like I wake up like man, work again. You know what I'm
right,
saying?
yeah,
I don't.
hmm, right,
And I understand that there are like I'm one of those people that like has the privilege of his work and his passion
mm,
overlapping,
yeah,
and everybody doesn't have that privilege.
yeah,
So I want to recognize that too. But I think that part of the problem is that identity is lived.
mm,
It's not something like. I don't know, how do you conceptualize it? It's like
yeah,
every time you think about it, it escapes you.
mm,
But when you're living into it, you experience it, right?
mm,
Do you get what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
It's something that's lived.
yeah,
And so like it seems to be this coming together of lived experience in the context of community that you make sense of yourself as the individual. You know
mm,
what I'm saying? But
yeah,
like we've got it backwards, or like I don't know, like it feels like we're just starting in the wrong place. So
mm,
maybe we're trying to overthink it. Um and I think like there's reasons for that, right? Like where we find ourselves in the culture, like how we're shaped by individualism, how we're shaped by empiricism, how we're shaped by
mm,
technology. And then we have like sexual revolution stuff, gender identity stuff, trying
yeah,
to make sense of who you are. I feel
yeah,
weird in my body, which I think is easy to do in a day and age where we're incredibly disconnected from ourselves and from others because
mm,
of technology, and we think about ourselves more than we ever have. I think that's a recipe for feeling incredibly disconnected in your body. But then we
mm,
chalk that up to uh, things that I wouldn't necessarily chalk it up to. I think there's a bunch
mm,
of stuff we can get to before we get to I'm a man trapped in a woman's body, or I'm a woman, or whatever,
yeah,
right? Like all the different
mhm,
types of things that we're talking about.
yeah,
And but I understand why we're here, how we got here. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
mhm,
Um, and so it makes sense that we find ourselves where we find ourselves right now based on like how we're thinking about identity and all the things that are happening in our world today. And then like just like our values, like you said, it's like what we value affects our identity. Absolutely. Like I remember I was listening to a podcast and this dude said something so profound. I'd never thought about it this way before. And when they were having a conversation about like the East and how oppressive, more Eastern countries can be towards women in particular. And the thing that this dude said, which I thought was profound, he said, well, what if those women don't find it oppressive, right? And obviously I know there are extreme cases, and we know there are cases where like there are oppressive, horrible things happening. So I want to make sure I said that before I continue, right?
Right.
But like, what if their highest value is not our highest value? Like, our highest value is freedom, individualism, self, right? What if theirs is not that? If it's not, then it's going to change the way they view their society, and it's going to change the way they think about the way roles operate in the context of the family and men and women and all those different types of things, right? And so it goes back to what you were saying about this idea of identity being tied to what you value. It absolutely is. Because, and then as a society, we value very specific things that other societies around the world don't necessarily value, or don't value as highly as we do. And that what that means is the way their families operate, and the way that they do things looks very different from the way that we do things. And like, once again, I think there are things that are like valuable about where we find ourselves today in America, and I think there are things about the way we find ourselves today that like are like not good at all. And I think the same is true for also like the East, right? Or like countries that are maybe a little bit more traditional or whatever else. So I think there's things to be learned from each other in that sense. But I think it's interesting that those countries are afraid of the ideologies that we've kind of like accepted here in the West, and the implications that they have for like destroying their societies as they know them. And ultimately, like, I think we have to look at like, yes, some of the things that have happened as a consequence that have been beautiful, and like all the opportunities that people have today and different things of that nature. But then there's been the flip side of that, mental health crisis, all the different types of conversations we've been having about race, and then some of the things that have happened in the country as a consequence. Like all the different conversations that we're having, I think are directly tied to, and all like the social angst and pressure and fear and emotional distress, and like I said, like all the identity stuff is wrapped up in like the ideology that we've wholesale accepted. So yeah, we're in a really interesting place in our world today, for sure.
I think why I want to talk about identity is because if you don't understand who you are and where you come from, it can be very damaging. And because I think this is, I understand that we're in an identity crisis. I really do. I get that. I see it in Gen Z. I really do.
Both
but
societally and individually and communally.
Facts. And I think I see it as an opportunity. That we should be able to really sit down, because I haven't read anyone in history that actually dive deep into identity. Now, if you know anybody in the comments, if you know anybody, leave it down in the comments.
Please.
I will gladly read them. But I haven't found anybody in history that actually sat down and talked about identity. Because you got, like, if we do our best to break it down to this idea of this is what I identify as. So if you identify yourself as something, that affects your behavior, that affects your how you perceive things, that affects the way you think, it affects your community. Like, identity affects literally your entire life. And so if that is true, right, then we need to really pay attention to what we value. And I said it earlier, but I think value is the answer. One of the answers when it comes to talking about identity. We need to talk about, well, what do you value? And the reason why we need to talk about what do you value, because identity is tied to what you are attached to.
Hmm.
Okay. Is
Absolutely.
this is what you're attached to. And so if you attach yourself to things that is perceived good but actually unhealthy, right? You need to ask the question, how does that affect your behavior? Right. And so like for instance, like when I was telling you earlier how I
Hmm.
detached myself from everything and I found myself in this sinking hole. I reattached myself back to everything that I liked, loved, and wanted and associated myself with, so I can have sanity, so I can have some saneness, some peace of mind, because I don't want to experience that again. But I think that's where most people are. But it also brings back the question for me is, Chris, is these things that you value healthy for who you think you are? Right. And I think that
Mm.
when we're saying, when we're tied to, when the scripture says we're made in the image of Christ, he just doesn't give us an image that is bad. He gives us an image that is healthy for the mind, healthy for the soul, and healthy for the community. Right. And so it's not just an identity that you bear from the creator, it's an identity that everyone can share and benefit from. And so when we try to create ourselves and then someone disagrees with it, or someone doesn't like it,
Mm.
or you don't like certain people that identify as this certain thing, you got
Mm.
to ask the question, is this separating us or bringing us together? You know what I'm saying?
It's
Is
good.
it actually healthy? Because what God did, he gave us an image that all of us can relate to, all of us can understand, that all of us can benefit from.
Hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? And so the identities that we are trying to create, from my personal opinion, I don't think that we're all benefiting from it well. The individual may be, because that is what you have decided to be.
That's
But you
good,
have
bro.
to you have to beg the question, is the family benefiting from it? Is the
Mm.
friends benefiting from it? Is the community, the country? Like we have to understand the image that God has given us is supposed to be beneficial for all humanity, because we bear his image, his
Hmm.
likeness, his morals, his love, his truth. That is where everything comes from. It comes from him. And it may sound oppressive, or it may sound like, oh man, it doesn't make any sense. Like when Christians say you need to find yourself in Christ. That is a conversation we need to be having actually. Right? What does that mean to actually find yourself in Christ? Right? Now, a lot of that is tied to the gifts and the talents that God has given you individually, and it also is tied to it. It ties to the image bearing of God, and so these things are very complicated, but it's very important to understand identity, because it can ruin an entire country. It can
Yeah,
divide
but
the.
even it's a great point that you bring up, like um your identity in Christ. Like even that's found in the context of Christian community. It's not
Yep.
like God sends you out to be an individual. Oh, just
Yes.
listen to the Holy Spirit and be by yourself, and I'll teach you
Yep.
everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Like, no, he tells you to get connected into community and to
Yep.
grow with all the other saints and to learn how to dwell with one another. And that, you
Yep.
know,
It's
there's no
true.
racism in the body. There's no
Yeah.
sexism in the body. Like all those different types of things, right, are supposed to be
Yep.
eradicated. That
Mm-hmm.
unity is essential. Like that's what we're
Mm-hmm.
moving towards, being unified.
Yep.
And I think ultimately that's what people want. People want to be unified with other people. Um, it's just that because of sin, we also want to ostracize other people too. So we
Yeah.
want to be unified with people who act like us, look like us, think like us, talk like us, walk
Yep.
like us, but we don't want to be unified with people that don't fit in that criteria. And
Mm.
if you, that's how we live, right? That's how we
Yep.
shop. That's
Yep.
that's that's how we make friends. That's how we
Mm.
pick schools. Like we
Yep.
want to be with certain groups of people and not with others, right?
Mm. Yep.
And so yeah, that's fascinating to think about. That's a good point, bro.
Yeah,
Um,
man.
I think for somebody listening who's like, okay, I've got all these young people around me with all these unique identities, or maybe struggling with their identity in a particular way, like how do I engage that? I
Mm.
think like, because we live in an individualized society, you're gonna have to engage it in an individualized way.
Mm.
Like, I think you can have the general conversation about identity and finding your identity in Christ. Like, I think that's something you can make clear and you can proclaim, right? Because I think the text gives you space to proclaim that. But I think, like, the uniqueness of everybody's individual situation with how individualized we are and how, like the identities that people claim to have in this day and age, to me, smack of this, like, desire to be known.
Mm.
And so, like, you can't pigeonhole me. Like, you can't just quite figure me out by looking at me. You're going to have to actually get to know me in order to, like, figure out who I truly am. And so I think people want to be known. And I think us as influencers, right? Parents, pastors, teachers, coaches, people who love and care for young people, like, we have to do the work of getting to know them individually as best as we can. The ones that are at least in our care anyways. And I think that's how we're going to have real opportunity to speak truth and love and grace into their lives. I think without that, it's going to be really difficult. And I think, like, when you have those individual, like, touch points and moments with them and get to know them in those individual ways, like, when you do proclaim truth on a macro level, they're going to be way more inclined to listen. And so, shameless plug, I think that's why we reframe content and resources the way that we do, in a conversational way. The reason for that is so you can have those touch points and those moments and get to know your students, and your students can get to know you, and vulnerability and trust can be built. But the gospel is clearly proclaimed. The truth is proclaimed. The kids can hear it and respond to it. And like, it becomes a youth community when everybody's growing together. And so, yeah, I think that's some of the uniqueness of what we do and what we create. And I think that's why it's so important, especially with something like this, which, because of the world that we live in and the variables that are at play in 2023, I think that is what makes this important, challenging, and then the approach we take is unique.
Yeah, I like that. I think, man, before we land the plane, right? One more thing about identity, because again, it's tied to value to a large degree. Identity is also found in pleasure, right? Like it's identity is also pleasure based. Okay.
Say more, bro.
And when I hear people say, I'm trying to find myself, what I hear is that you're trying to find what you like, right? What you find pleasure in. Pleasure is a very interesting idea, which I think we should have a discussion about, because I think
sounds like it.
It's objectively true for all humanity. We all seek pleasure,
Facts.
Even to a certain degree, hatred is pleasure because you want revenge, and so it's
stop it.
Yeah, I know, but it's pleasure is a very interesting word, and that should be a discussion on its own. But I think pleasure also plays a part in identity. And I think this is where Christ comes into play, because when he reveals himself to the individual, there's a certain pleasure in it. It's not just a revelation.
Christian hedonism.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah. It's a delight. It's a delight. When you're in prayer and you sit in God's presence, and there is a certain pleasure that comes with that. Or when you have a struggle in life, you're reminded of Christ. You're reminded of his faithfulness. You're reminded of his word. It brings pleasure. And I think
that's
pleasure,
good, bro.
I think there is something to say about pleasure when it comes to identity.
Bro, that is good. I think the neural pathways in my brain just connected on everything you were saying. I'm like, oh, snap.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. Our identity is very much connected to what we like and the pleasure that we get from that particular thing. If we get pleasure from it, we tend to identify with it, right?
Yes. Yep.
Bro,
absolutely.
That is good.
Correct.
Ooh, Chris. Philosopher Chris. Dang, I'm going to be chewing on that for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
That is good, bro. Yeah, that's a great point. But I think that speaks to, once again, like the pleasure that can be found in relationship with Jesus. Like
Yeah.
like it's not like we just like follow Jesus. Like we follow Jesus because we believe he is who he said he is, of course.
Mhm.
But like
Yep.
there are these moments of incredible pleasure and
Yeah.
like connection with God or
Mm.
with God's people that kind of anchor you and ground you, right? And like I take incredible pleasure in spending time with my kids, in
Yes.
like, spending time with my wife, you know
Yep.
what I'm saying?
Hmm.
All those different
Yep.
types of things, your marital responsibilities, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So like, yeah, like it makes sense that I would identify with those things because those things bring me joy and pleasure in life.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, yeah, if I'm finding joy and pleasure in a particular thing, I'm going to identify with it.
Yep.
I guess the question is like, is that joy and pleasure lasting,
Mm.
sustainable?
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Eternal benefit, or
Mm,
like everlasting benefit outside this life. We are. I think it was John Piper who even pointed it out. Right. It's like there's this, and I don't want to butcher his words, so I'm gonna kind of just phrase it a little bit. But it's we are we don't really, in a sense, die. We just move
hmm
somewhere else. And
Yep.
so it's like the pleasure that we have in Christ in the world increases when we're with Him in heaven. It increases. It doesn't stop. It's
Mm,
just the fullness of the pleasure, the fullness of who
that's
He
dope.
is. And so
Yep.
like the pleasure that we have here with Him. And sometimes it goes and it comes. Sometimes like, oh God, where are you? Oh God, answer my prayers. It's like, but still, it's like there is pleasure in knowing that He has you and He's faithful, and He surrounds you with community and family, and you can see His love. You can see that He sees you. That pleasure, like, man, He sees me, He got me, and then next thing you know,
hmm
you reunited with Him face to face, and then you see the eyes of fire, you see His glory,
hmm
like you see it, you like, this is forever now.
mm
And so that
mm.
that pleasure is what we ought to be pursuing, because that is what we
The
ought to be.
ultimate pleasure, the
Ultimate
ultimate
pleasure.
identity.
Exactly.
That's good,
That in
bro.
itself is what we should be. And so I
That's good.
really enjoyed this conversation, man. I would
100%.
encourage everyone to like and subscribe, subscribe, and share this video. And let's get the conversation going about identity, because it's being attacked right now.
Mm,
The identity is of mankind is being attacked. And so let's really talk about it. Let's bring it to light. Let's discuss, and
mm.
let's figure this thing out together. So
Absolutely. That's good,
yeah,
bro.
man. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
All right, guys. Well, that's the beginning of the conversation, not the end.
Yes, sir.
Questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the chat. Um, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you see it.
Sure.
If you feel like it's going to be beneficial to somebody else who's influencing Gen Z students, young people, send it to them.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to like have these conversations about hard things and
Sure.
create space for that to happen. And so, yeah, we love you guys and we'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Peace.